I think I've already introduced myself, but I'm taking you read the program if you're here. We're going to talk a little bit about nitrogen today and hopefully how we can increase our efficiency. And then this will be kind of a walk through quite a few different areas in regard to nitrogen, so hopefully everybody might see something a little bit new. And this is what I like to call my mandatory crowd participation part of the talk. Other than the rice seed going in the ground, what's the most important input in the rice? Specifically nitrogen, in terms of setting our yield potential. No question about it every time. We're going to keep going, we got a couple of these. What timing is most important for our production?
Pre-flood.
All right, got it. Pre-flood. Absolutely. That sets the tone for the whole year, entire yield potential for the year. Got to get the pre-flood right, or as right as Mother Nature will allow us. Who had any luck with that in 2015? Not hardly? No. But we did the best we could, and that's all we got to shoot for with the pre-flood, to do the best we can. But in that vegetative stage, early on, that's what we're really focused on. So pre-flood, if I'm touting that as being everything, what's mid-season fertilization? Obviously, I know I'm steering toward varieties with this question, but what's mid-season? An opportunity. An opportunity to recover yield that we didn't otherwise set with the pre-flood nitrogen shot. And that's really what it's there for, is when we can't do a single pre-flood option, which is something we'll talk about today, which that's not for everybody either. Just a simple, basic jumping off point for just basic nitrogen management. I think most everybody's on board with treating the urea these days, putting one of these products on it. Hands down, if it's going on the soil, it needs to have an NBPT product on it. Unless you can literally get that field covered with water in a day. After that, you have volatilization. We're going to give some away. I think depending on your nitrogen rate, you're looking at probably $8 or $9 an acre. I'll show you pretty easily why that's money well spent. If you are putting follow-up nitrogen in the water prior to mid-season, or your mid-season shot, or the late boot shot on a hybrid, do not treat the urea. One acre inch of water, 27,000 gallons. Now throw that treated urea into it. What happens to that treatment? Gone immediately. So, and we verified that, by the way. This one, to just point out what it is, and I know it's just after lunch. Scott, probably a little bit more entertaining. We're going to look at data, so if I see anybody nodding off, I got some guys in here I know might tap you on the back of the head. We're looking at ammonia volatilization, so laying on the soil surface, basically turning our nitrogen loose. Good money wasted. The two blue bars that you're looking at are basically the checkered ones are where we put it on mud. So obviously straight urea put on mud, what's that? By 2 days, we've already lost 10%. That's fast, and it continues to go up. Compare that to dry, we're definitely a lot better, but that's a pretty steep loss. Treat it with agritane, in this example agritane, I just listed a bunch of the other ones that are also approved. We get the same benefit from. You see that even on that muddy soil, looking out across there, how much longer it takes to start losing that nitrogen. Now, most of the fields we're dealing with, even the best ones, take a few days to get flooded up. So we're already looking 5% lost even on the fields we can flood the quickest. There are some other practices we can do to help with that, and we'll move on to talk about some of those. A frequent question is, well, why do I always have to use urea? Can I use something else? There are absolutely other things you can use, just price becomes a factor. If anybody's looking at urea prices right now, urea looks pretty good. All we're comparing on this one is simply urea put on dry ground in the blue, urea versus urea with NBPT product in the red, ammonium sulfate on the green. On the far right, still looks red, but in orange was a blend of ammonium sulfate plus urea. So the 1, 5, and 10 just means how long it laid out there on the soil before we flooded it up. Before flooding out. Dry ground, so you wait on that magic rain-free period. One of those years you actually catch that. So the urea plus NBPT and the AMS are actually pretty similar when you look at that overall yield potential out there. Their volatilization, but then you're just comparing price. So that's where we frequently steer you right back toward urea in those situations. Plant nitrogen uptake. this is going to kind of set the tone for a few other comments here later. That the major takeaway from this is that you can see that for our pre-flood nitrogen, it takes it right at 3 weeks to take up all of the nitrogen that we're going to take up from the pre-flood application. So that, keep that in mind, that 3 week or 21-day number. Now, in the mid-season application, anytime after green ring, in 3 days, you've pretty much taken it all up. The plant has shifted gears at that point. The root structure is different. When we put that application into the water, there's actually a lot of lateral root growth at that point that will actually just draw it in really fast. It's not there early on when the plant's small and attempting to root down and grow. That's why it doesn't grab any of that early on, or do it, you're extremely inefficient at it anyway. So some of our previous mid-season recommendations, and I'm talking about varieties now at this point, has always been, or historically, was apply mid-season in 2 applications. Actually, even before that, it was a three application. That's reaching back pretty far though at this point. Looking at around half-inch internode elongation, come back 10, 14 days later, we kind of shifted gears in the last 15 to 20 years and moved that to recommending just 1 application, shooting for between green ring and half-inch. Well, now I'm going to tell you how we're going to change that again. That growth stage timing has always been what we've critically shot for. And that's the ones I just mentioned, that whether it's half-inch or green ring, that's it. Well, now, based on what we've been doing for the past 4 or 5 years, we can tell you that certainly matters. We want to get past green ring and get into reproductive growth. The problem is time is actually just as critical as hitting that growth stage at that point. So I don't expect anybody to completely understand everything that's going on here, even as I try to explain it. So on the bottom, it's number of days after we incorporated our pre-flood nitrogen. And all these are just the yield responses. And to give you an idea, this is from 2012 to 2015. Each one of those lines represents a variety at a site. It might be Kaiser in northeast Arkansas, it might be Stuttgart, it might be Pine Tree, and all kinds of different varieties. The take home is that you see the general trend on every single one of those is that the further away from that pre-flood application we are, higher the yield, right? The more it's up. It's definitely not lower. It's never lower. And what we've been able to figure out from this in general is that we do need to get to green ring before we put out mid-season, but you need to wait that minimum of 3 weeks. Remember that 21-day uptake timing from that pre-flood nitrogen? And we didn't design, at least one year, we didn't design it this way. It just kind of happened. It stayed wet on us too, and by the time we got to a couple of our sites, it was a little bit late, but we stuck with it. We put out our pre-flood nitrogen, flooded up, and the next week we were at green ring. Well, that was one of our mandatory timings, so we stuck with our typical structure. And I can't remember which one, it may be the one at the bottom, quite frankly, that orange one nearest the bottom, where that's where we actually got to 21 days after that pre-flood went out, despite the fact we were at green ring. Once we got past 3 weeks, that mid-season timing actually finally caused a yield increase. So really doesn't matter, believe it or not, that the actual growth stage at that point, we want to be in reproductive, but we want to be 3 weeks out. We actually had in a number of these situations, the really, really late application timings, there were flag leaves coming out. We weren't heading, there were flag leaves coming out. We didn't hurt yield. Everybody okay with that? Getting some dirty looks, I think, around the room. We were as surprised as anybody. We didn't think it would hold out. So the next question I got, and I told somebody this the other day, and said, so how far can you go? Well, to be honest, we didn't hit a tail off. So my immediate answer would be, we don't obviously want to be heading when it goes out, but we actually haven't confirmed that yet, but it stands to reason once we enter grain field, that plant once again shifts gears, and we're not going to be able to do anything. But working off of that same principle and those timings that we stayed with, again, hitting it at green ring, plus 7 days, plus 14 days, plus 21 days. What's the best yield? This is across all those sites and years, varieties, and timing. The best one was actually later. And the only thing that it compared with was the single pre-flood shot, which we'll talk about in a second as being the most efficient yield setting one anyway. That's the only thing that actually competed with it. So that really the take home, what I want you to walk out of here with is if you have any doubt about putting out your mid-season nitrogen, wait. It's actually better to wait with mid-season than it is to pull the trigger too early. Where we pulled the trigger too early with some of those timings, that's absolutely the case why they trend down there. We were not 3 weeks in at the point that we hit green rain at that point. Now, there's some situations, there will always be, where you got enough pre-flood nitrogen out, high native soil nitrogen, where no mid-season application gets a response. Those happen too, we have those sites as well. But that's by far the exception, not the rule. So on that note, I just pointed out the single pre-flood nitrogen application, how well that can work. Every time we do this in any trial, when we do a single pre-flood nitrogen application, no mid-season, no anything else, it's tied for the highest yield or it stands alone as the highest yielder. And the general principle for that is if your season-long nitrogen rate is 150 units of nitrogen, 105 pre-flood, 45 mid-season, you can take 20 units off of that total, and that's your pre-flood rate.
What soil type? What soil type?
Not specific to any soil type. Whatever your rate is for your soil type, as of that 150 total would be our standard for a silt loam. So if our standard on clay, say 180, 160 units. Now, I'm saying units, I mean units of nitrogen, not pounds of urea. So we'll have to do the math on that to convert it. But absolutely, you can trim that off, and that'll work. That'll save you 20 units of nitrogen. Yes, sir.
Y'all did some work on splitting that pre-flood a few years ago. Are you still doing that, or do you think it just all needs to go out one shot?
All needs to go out in one shot. Sorry, I didn't catch that as far as trying to split up that pre-flood shot, whether that be 60 units, immediately come back 10 days later and put the remainder on dry ground, incorporated with the flood. And there are some specific keys to this. I hope show up next. Very good. I finished putting this together last night. Sometimes you get surprised on the slide. These conditions are pretty much mandatory to get the full benefit and actually make this practice work. Got to be dry soil. It does not have to be cracking necessarily, which we say is pretty regular. Obviously that's great if it is, but dry enough to walk on firmly is plenty dry enough. Has to be treated. Silt loam, we're shooting for around 3 days being able to flood up, 7 to 10 on clay. And if you can really adhere to those things, you can do single pre-flood. Now the worst thing that happens, you're paying based on pounds, right? When Flying Service puts it out, paying based on pounds. Worst thing that happens is maybe you don't get flooded up as quickly, maybe the well goes down, maybe anything happens. You can come back out and you still have the remaining nitrogen that you would have paid for in the first place anyway, just to add back. It's not really an added cost at that point that you would come back with. I think the one thing I left off on here, but it's the recurring theme, is that hold the flood for 3 weeks, or at least don't let it get dry. And I'll actually show you here in a minute an example of what happens when that does occur. And it's not so much the losing the flood that's an issue. It's if you lose it really quickly, you have to come back with the flood again. That's where the loss actually occurs. So if you actually get out there and you lose the flood in about 2, maybe 2.5 weeks, as long as you don't drought stress the plants, I would encourage you to not re-flood until you got past 3 weeks. When that flood comes back on, whatever nitrogen is left the plant hadn't taken up, we're probably going to lose at that point. Plenty of y'all have probably heard us talk about Instar regularly. I'm not going to spend much time on it, just need to bring it up as a point of managing nitrogen use. The take home is everything that's highlighted in yellow, and this is taken from our verification program, where we incorporate our recommended practices, Instar being a standard recommendation. Don't have the 2015 data in yet and completed, this is 2014. Just looking across the fields, you can see that below our standard recommendation is the common theme, with an average of over 20 units reduction by using Instar. The yields, that's 187, the state average was 168, so we're ahead of the state average by 19-20 bushels. That's pretty regular. And if you look up and down, they're not all bin busters, but our common feedback is we are essentially in every case as good or better than surrounding fields on those same producers in terms of yield, and the input costs are always lower. which is what we're really shooting for. And you see 200 bushel I-180s, 190s scattered throughout there regularly, with saving 20 units of nitrogen. And there are a couple that recommend an increase in nitrogen. We don't want to act like that won't happen, and some will come back with no change to the standard. But it is something to look at and see if you can make a change. Maybe not, then you don't have to sample anymore. One additional thing we've been looking at the past couple of years is the influence of our management practices, our irrigation management practices specifically, on how we need to deal with nitrogen. More people are getting interested in row rice. You guys talked just before lunch, if you were in here, about alternate wetting and drying. Trying to take on some of those practices, and each one of those can create a little bit different situation where we need to try to manage. So this is just from 2014, and those random lines you see running across, that would be your standard. That's our continuous flood treatment for, if it's in blue, it's 745. If it's in yellow, it's Roy J. And within these years, you can see that's your standard level. So if I can be clear at all, these treatments are, this set here is continuous flood versus spoon feed. So that's 5 shots of 100 pounds of urea once a week instead of anything on dry soil, because we've gotten those situations the past couple of years. So it doesn't look like something I'd recommend, does it you? Doesn't look worth it, especially not for 500 pounds of urea. We did have some questions. People were asking us about various straight head drains. Believe it or not, that yes, that still is a problem on rice ground in Arkansas. What happens when we do have to straight head drain? If we do it on time, what happens? And the take home is, if you look at it, there's really not much give and take. Actually, increased yield on the Roy J a little bit, but relatively no change with doing a straight head drain if you follow the actual DD50 recommended timing. And ultimately on intermittent flooding or alternate wetting and drying, this is that unique situation I talked about with waiting 3 weeks. Well, within this year, guess what? We got dry 2 weeks in. And most guys that are doing this right now will tell you that's a no, we don't do that. We were aware going into it. We were trying to see what the end result was. And ultimately, we turned around and reflooded. And the big jump you see with the bars next to it, that's where we added just another 30 units on the ground, some of it before we reflooded. So that's ultimately what came back, is we lost some nitrogen and we were able to put it back at that time. And we just let it sit out and not put the water back on it for just a little bit, we probably would have been okay. And these kind of pretty low numbers down here where we were attempting to do flush/furrow irrigated rice, and I still don't feel like we have the best handle in all situations on how to actually manage nitrogen in that situation. Try to put it out all at once, tried putting it out in a spoon feed approach in between irrigations, things like that. Still never got a great yield push out of it, just didn't feel like we ever had it as well watered as we should have, no matter how frequently. 3 times a week we were watering it. We did repeat that again in 2015, got much the same results. Again, the spoon feeding didn't look great, got pretty much the same thing on a straight head, no change. The same bump on alternate wetting and drying. Exact same thing happened again, even in another kind of wet early year. We got dry in about 2 weeks, went ahead and flooded back up, and where we didn't add more nitrogen, we actually saw a yield loss. And this is kind of the take home from that on dealing with the spoon feed approach. No matter when we did it, there's a couple of hybrids, there's a couple of varieties. Again, that's the treatment where we put out 500 pounds of urea in a spoon feed. So we're talking 225 units of nitrogen spoon feeding versus 120 on the others. That's CF on every one. That's the continuous flood put on dry ground in a single shot. We just cannot get there. Well, we actually had the question, is that even the best way? That's become a fairly standard practice when people go to spoon feed, is putting it out once a week, 100 pounds. Well, is that actually even the best way? I'll counter that it's not, actually. We threw a lot of things at the wall. Actually ran a DD50 program on this trial to actually have our date of when, based on heat units, we're supposed to have our pre-flood nitrogen out on dry ground, hopefully, and flood up. So that's our single pre-flood that I'm referring to. And then the 2-way split That's your pre-flood followed by mid-season, so we got the pre-flood on that one out on dry ground as well. And then that light blue bar up here, that's that treatment we were using on those previous slides. It's about the worst one. All the rest of these went by the final DD50 time. All these were put in the water. Everything other than those two down there that are pretty high yield were all everything went in the water. So whether I put 100 pounds of urea a week for 5 weeks, or went with 60 units 4 times over 4 weeks, changed it up, whatever, nothing got anywhere close with an excessive amount of nitrogen. The best thing we did was actually wait until that final DD50 time when the plants were a little bit bigger before that first shot went out, just boom feed. And that was the best thing we could have done. And I'll counter that when it's at about 155 and everything else is 165 to 185, we have a whole lot of input and didn't make much headway. I think that's about the last take-home point that I have. Pre-flood in rate and efficiency are critical. We're looking for applications to dry soil number 1. That's where actually the DD50 program might have its greatest utility, is those recommendations based on heat units and how old that rice is. One of the things we've run into the past couple of years would have to do with, well, the rice, how big was the rice? It wasn't very tall. Well, that's not what I meant. How old is the rice? I don't know, it's about that tall. Maybe, might have been 8 to 10 leaf. Already said it's stillers. And we hadn't put out any nitrogen in some of those fields. And in some cases, we get caught without levees up. And I understand you can't put out pre-flood nitrogen and get it flooded if you don't even have levees up. But in those situations, we're really going to be interested in trying to flush something in, whether it be 100 pounds of urea or some ammonium sulfate, whatever, but get something to those small plants in those situations to get them growing and start feeding their growth as they start heading into the tillering stage. So we're shooting for dry soil number 1. We're going to wait as long as we can. Worst case scenario, we're going to get it out on muddy ground. Try to let it dry underneath it if you will. If it's treated with an MVPT product, you're going to want to bump the N rate a little bit if you know it's going on mud. But you can get it out there and you can afford to let it sit for a couple of days before you start the water, and kind of account for that loss by bumping it just a little bit. And then spoon feeding, just a last resort, or just catching a flooding rain after a flooding rain, and we just finally have to do something. But it's going to be inefficient, and odds are we can't keep up. Mid-season timing, got to be at green ring and no earlier than 3 weeks after the pre-flood was actually incorporated. Got to meet both conditions, or odds are we're not going to achieve our maximum efficiency. And by that I mean the most important part, you're not going to make as many bushels. Not as much money in your pocket as you do for the same input. If we go too early, you might waste it. And that final one, treat the urea, whether it be on dry or muddy soil, because of the increased efficiency that we get. I think a lot of times when we talk about why yield somewhat improved over the past several years quite a bit, the adoption of these type of products probably has a lot to do with it, and more than we talk about and notice. But treating that urea so we don't have as much volatilization probably plays a huge role.
Doc, a lot of questions from people. They're there up on, a lot of doubt, a lot of ammonium sulfate going out, which is, everybody wants to use that as part of their pre-flood nitrogen. You talk on that a minute about, do you use that
As a part
as
of
a
the
part of
pre-flood,
that pre-flood nitrogen?
as a part of the pre-flood nitrogen, if you need phosphorus, by all means, that's a good timing for phosphorus to go out, pre-flood timing. Just account for nitrogen unit when you blend it in and work it out. In some of those cases, my main consideration with trying to blend a lot of those all has to do with bulk density and actually getting
But I'm saying
distribution.
on ammonium sulfate, if you're using that 21 units as part of your pre-flood nitrogen, if you put it out at 1 or 2 leaves,
No,
are you
okay.
taking,
Okay, well,
that's the question.
Okay, two different things. If we're talking about a more of a starter type,
Right.
2-leaf fertilizer, you really don't even need to bother accounting for much of that toward your season total nitrogen. If you're putting out 100 pounds of ammonium sulfate, that's 21 units. If you wanted to try to count about 7 units toward it, you can do that. That's about as far as I try to stretch it. Most of the time, we're not getting a yield response out of those 2 to 3 leaf shots. That doesn't mean I'm telling you not to do them. I agree with Scott, especially on heavy ground. the response we get from those applications, especially if it tries to cool off at all and slow them down, that growth, time is money. And on a lot of heavy ground especially, that's 5 days, can be. Putting that application out in front of a rain, getting it flushed in for free, we can see that crop grow off and do a lot. Just don't necessarily expect that you're gonna get a clear yield payoff for having done it.
I get a question every year about corn farmer wanting to use ammonium nitrate.
Don't
How
do
you
it.
get hold of it?
Doesn't work very well. Not in the way that we grow rice and produce it. We're constantly looking for ways to, whether it be at planting or pre-plant or some way that we can put nitrogen out and have it truly available and not lose most of it later on. And just for the way that we grow rice in our system, it just doesn't really work. And that form is not a good way at all to put out nitrogen pre-flood in our drill seed delayed flood system. Too much loss. Yes, sir.
What about, you get your, put your pre-flood fertilizer out, it's ready, it's fully ready, get a shower and rain. You wouldn't flood it up as soon as you can?
Yes, as fast as you can. John, if you already have the urea out,
If you throw the urea out, you just get a half inch rain.
it's already started to break down, flood it as fast as you can. Yes,
But go ahead, finish full of it.
absolutely. Just keep going as fast as you can. Anytime that happens, anytime that you get it out there, and that goes back to even the muddy soil situation, which in a lot of cases, that's it. You're waiting for it to dry up to pull levees. So you go ahead and fly it on, still a little bit muddy, but you're making do. As soon as you get a rain on top of it, that agritane or infix, whatever, break down, that half inch did it. It's time to go, get the water on top of it as fast as you can at that point.
Did you account for any nitrogen behind chicken litter?
Yes, yes. Depends strictly on analysis. We're not
What
going to account
percentage?
for a lot, and it's going to depend on exactly when it went out.
Spring applied?
Spring applied, if it comes back with, if we're getting 40, by the analysis, if we're getting 40 units an acre, maybe half.
What about the litter that's taken out of the sheds in the fall? She's stockpiled out there, and they put it out in the spring, and they're expecting 50 units out. What do you
Have it
tell them?
reanalyzed. Have it reanalyzed. There's absolutely no telling, and we've run into that in the past year or two, doing clean outs and stuff like that, and not having a new analysis or a recent analysis of a bunch of that litter, and expecting more phosphorus, more nitrogen out of some of this stuff, and it's just not there. But they're getting a reduced price for it, for that reason, but not getting what they need. It's happened to us a lot.
What about fall applied litter?
Sorry?
What if it was applied in the fall?
And incorporated,
Yeah.
probably gonna be pretty close to the same at that point. Most of it's gonna be pretty tied up. Nitrogen's probably gonna be a little bit less, but the other nutrients are really gonna be there. Not gonna see a lot of difference. Do you have anything to add to that? How are we on time? I apologize, I think we're about out. If anybody has any more questions, we'll be hanging around.